This story is true. I need you to understand that before anything else. You'll tell yourself it's fiction. You'll want to believe it's an urban legend or some forgotten folktale that got twisted over the years. But that's not what this is. I lived this. I watched it unfold with my own eyes. And even now, even after everything I've seen, I still don't fully understand it. But I know one thing for certain. The lake does not reflect. The lake takes. It started with an old map. My name is Ethan Holloway. I used to run a small YouTube channel focused on abandoned places and urban legends. Nothing major, just a passion project I maintained on the side. The videos never got much traction beyond a niche audience of horror lovers, but I didn't care. I enjoyed the thrill of exploring places with dark histories, especially when they hadn't been widely documented. That's how I ended up with the map. It was sent to me by an anonymous user after I posted a video about vanishing towns, settlements that seemed to disappear overnight, leaving nothing but rumors and half-buried foundations. The message attached to the map was short and vague. If you're looking for something truly forgotten, try here. Nobody talks about it for a reason. The map itself was old, possibly decades, yellowed and fraying at the edges. It detailed a heavily forested region in the Pacific Northwest, somewhere between Washington and Oregon. No name, no roads leading to it, just a hand-drawn X marking an isolated lake. I was immediately intrigued. I scoured the internet for any mention of a missing town or strange lake in the region, but there was nothing. No history, no folklore, no record of the lake even existing. The satellite images showed dense forest where the lake should have been, which didn't make sense. Had it dried up? Was the map outdated? Most people would have left it at that. But I wasn't most people. I set out that weekend with my camera gear and my friend Mark. He was a skeptic, but he had an adventurous streak and wasn't about to pass up a chance to explore somewhere completely off the grid. We drove as far as we could before the roads turned to barely navigable dirt paths, then hiked the remaining distance using an old compass to guide us. The deeper we went, the quieter everything became. No birds, no insects, just the crunch of leaves beneath our boots and the occasional whisper of wind through the branches. After about 3 hours of hiking, we found it, the lake. At first glance, it was unremarkable, just a body of water nestled within a hollow of trees. But then I noticed something that made my stomach twist. There was no reflection. The sky above was a mix of grays and blues, but the water remained a perfect, motionless black. Even when Mark tossed a rock into it, causing ripples to spread, there was no change. No mirrored image of the trees. No distorted reflection of our own faces. Just blackness. Mark laughed it off, calling it an optical illusion, but I wasn't convinced. I pulled out my camera and started recording. That's when the unease crept in. Even through the lens, the water refused to reflect. I adjusted the focus, changed the lighting, nothing. It was like looking into a void, like the lake wasn't just dark, but empty. And then something moved. Not in the water. Beneath it. A slow, undulating shift, like something massive was drifting just beneath the surface. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I must have gone pale, because Mark frowned and followed my gaze. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Mark hesitated. "See what?" Before I could respond, the movement stopped. The water was still again, perfectly flat. I told myself it was a trick of the light, that my mind was playing games. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. and I knew we should have left right then and there. We made camp near the tree line, setting up a small fire as the sun dipped behind the canopy. The lake remained unervingly still. Not even a shimmer of moonlight touched its surface. I reviewed the footage on my camera, hoping to find something I had missed with the naked eye. The video played normally, us hiking, reaching the clearing, Mark tossing the rock into the water. But when I reached the moment where I had seen something move, the screen glitched. Not a normal glitch. A deep, guttural distortion rippled through the audio, and for a split second, the screen was filled with static. Then, frame by frame, something emerged in the footage. Not fully, not visibly, but just enough. Just enough to make my stomach drop. A shape, human-like, almost, rising from the black water. And behind it, our reflections. Not on the lake, on the shore. Twisted, wrong versions of us. I yanked the camera's battery out, heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't say anything to Mark. Not yet. Not until I could process what I had just seen. I barely slept that night. Every so often, I would hear something, soft splashes, like something moving in the water. And then, around 3 a.m., I heard something else. Footsteps. Not in the forest. Not from our campsite. From the lake. A slow, deliberate squelching. Waterlogged feet pressing into the earth. Moving closer. I clenched my eyes shut and forced myself not to look. If I looked, I would see them. I don't know how I knew that, but I knew. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I dared to glance at the shoreline. There were footprints in the damp soil, leading from the lake, but none leading back. I woke Mark. We were leaving. No arguments. No discussion. But as we packed up, Mark suddenly stopped, his face drained of color. His voice was barely a whisper. "Where's your reflection?" I turned to the lake, and my breath caught in my throat. Mark's reflection was there, but mine was missing. This is still real. I need you to remember that. If you start thinking of this as just another internet horror story, you'll miss the truth hiding beneath it. You'll dismiss the warnings, and that's exactly what it wants. What they want. The lake took something from me that day, but I didn't realize how much it had taken, how much of me was already gone, until it was too late. We left the lake in a hurry. Mark didn't argue. He saw the fear in my face, and I think deep down he felt it too. We packed in record time and retraced our path back through the forest. But the forest wasn't the same. The deeper we went, the more wrong things became. The trees weren't in the same places. I know how that sounds, but it's true. The landmarks we used to navigate, the fallen oak with the moss-covered roots, the split pine with a hollow center, they were gone. Or moved. Every direction looked identical. Every path led us back to the lake. Mark cursed under his breath, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting to see something trailing us. And I think there was. I could feel it. Something watching, waiting, somewhere between the trees, somewhere just out of sight. Something was there. We kept moving, refusing to acknowledge the creeping sense of dread wrapping around us. Hours passed. The sun started sinking, and then, finally, we stumbled upon the road. It shouldn't have taken that long. It shouldn't have been that hard. But we didn't stop to question it. We just got in the car and drove. The paranoia didn't fade after we left the woods. Something still fell off. At first, I chalked it up to exhaustion. My body felt drained, like I was missing something vital. My head ached. My skin felt wrong, as if it didn't quite fit. But the worst part? I couldn't see my own reflection. Not just in the lake, Everywhere. The rearview mirror, store windows, even my phone's front-facing camera, nothing. Just an empty space where I should have been. Mark thought I was messing with him at first, until we stopped at a gas station and he saw it for himself. We were in the bathroom, standing in front of the grimy mirror. Mark stared at me, then at the glass, then back at me. His hands trembled. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. I waved a hand in front of my face. The mirror reflected the stall behind me, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. But not me. Mark grabbed my shoulder. His grip was tight, desperate. "This is a trick, right?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "This is some kind of, it's not a trick." My throat was dry. "I don't know what's happening." Mark let go and stumbled back. This isn't possible. It's got to be some kind of neurological thing, maybe stress-induced. Then why can you see me standing right in front of you?" His breath hitched. I turned away from the mirror. My hands were shaking. I forced myself to breathe, to think. Something was wrong with me. Something the lake had done. Had it taken my reflection? Or had it taken me? I didn't say it out loud, but I could feel the thought twisting itself into my brain, settling into my bones like a sickness. What if I never left the lake at all? We drove in silence after that. Mark kept glancing at me like he expected me to disappear at any moment. I kept staring at my own hands, flexing my fingers, feeling the weight of my body in the seat, proving I was still here. But it didn't feel real. Nothing did. It got worse when we reached my apartment, because that's when I saw it. My reflection, not in the bathroom mirror, not in the hallway window, outside, standing in the parking lot, looking up at me. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat. The figure below was me, but not quite. Its posture was too still. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle. And worst of all, it was smiling. I stumbled back from the window, heart hammering against my ribs. When I looked again, it was gone. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing grinning up at me. I saw myself, but it wasn't me. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and confusion. My reflection was never where it should have been. Sometimes it was absent altogether, just an empty void where I should have been. Other times, it was there when I wasn't looking. I would catch glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye. And just once, I saw it moving out of sync with me. That was the night I finally broke down and told Mark everything. He didn't handle it well. "This is insane," he said, pacing my living room. "You need help, man. Like real help. I'm not crazy. Ethan, you're saying your own reflection is stalking you. How am I supposed to react to that?" I opened my mouth to argue, but then Mark froze. His eyes widened. His face went pale. I turned. The bathroom mirror. The door was slightly ajar, just enough for us to see the glass. And standing in the reflection, just the reflection, was me grinning. Mark shoved me backward and slammed the door shut. We didn't speak. We didn't move. The silence pressed in around us like a physical force. Then soft footsteps from inside the bathroom. Mark grabbed his car keys. "We're leaving. Now." I didn't argue. We drove all night, putting as much distance between us and that thing as possible. We didn't talk much. What could we even say? By the time we stopped, the sun was rising. A cheap motel off the highway. Mark booked us a room. "Whatever's happening," he said, rubbing a hand over his face, "we'll figure it out. We just need time." I nodded, but I wasn't sure time would help, because something told me whatever came back from that lake wasn't me. And worse, I think it wanted to replace me. It's getting harder to convince myself that I'm real. I need you to understand that. When you look in the mirror, you know it's you. The same gestures, the same movements, a perfect synchronization between reality and reflection. But what if one day that synchronization broke? What if you looked into a mirror and saw something else? Something close to you, but not quite. Something wearing your face. Mark and I barely slept that first night at the motel. Not that I could sleep even if I wanted to, because every time I started drifting off, I saw it. My reflection, standing over my bed, not moving, just watching. Every time I jolted awake, the room was normal. Mark was snoring softly in the other bed. The bathroom mirror was covered with a towel we'd thrown over it earlier. But I could feel it. Something wasn't right. The air felt heavier, thick, like the atmosphere before a storm. I turned on my side and stared at the wall. Maybe if I ignored it, maybe if I pretended it wasn't happening, it would go away. It didn't. The next morning, Mark woke up groggy but determined. "We need answers," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Something happened at that lake. Something real. And we're not going to figure out by sitting here waiting for." He trailed off. His eyes locked onto the mirror. The towel we had thrown over it was gone, folded neatly on the bathroom counter. Neither of us had moved it. A thick silence filled the room. Mark took a deep breath and grabbed my arm. "Get your stuff. We're leaving." I didn't argue. The plan was simple. Go back to the lake. I know how that sounds. Why would he go back? Why return to the place that started all of this? Because we had no other choice. If we ran, this thing would follow. If we ignored it, it would only get worse. I could feel it growing stronger, like a second presence inside me. Like I wasn't alone in my own skin anymore. We drove in silence. The trees blurred past the car windows, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers. Mark gripped the wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. "I don't like this," he muttered. "Neither do I." He exhaled through his nose. "But you feel it too, right? Like it's waiting for us." I nodded, because that was the worst part. It wanted us to come back. By the time we reached the lake, the sky was overcast. The air was unnaturally still. No birds, no wind, not even the sound of rustling leaves. Just silence. The lake stretched out before us, dark and motionless. No ripples, no movement, like a black mirror swallowing the sky. I took a step forward and froze. There was something wrong with my reflection. Mark noticed it too. "Jesus," he whispered. I looked down. In the water, I saw two of me. One directly beneath me, mirroring my movements, and another standing slightly behind it, not moving, just grinning. Mark grabbed my arm. "We shouldn't be here." "I know." I took a step back, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. But then the second reflection moved. Not with me. On its own. Its head tilted. Its grin widened. And then it reached up. The water rippled. And something grabbed my ankle. I don't remember falling. I don't remember hitting the water. All I remember is the feeling of something pulling me down. Cold hands. Too many fingers. Dragging me into the dark. I don't know how long I was under. Seconds? Minutes? Hours? Time didn't exist down there. I opened my eyes and saw nothing. Not the surface. Not the sky. Just black water stretching forever in every direction. And then I saw them. Dozens of pale faces drifting in the abyss. Eyes wide. Mouths open. Trapped. Their reflections stolen. Their bodies hollow. I tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the void. Something moved behind me. I turned and saw myself. The other me. It reached out, placing a cold, wet hand on my shoulder. And then it smiled. A voice, my voice, whispered in my head, "You don't belong here. Not yet." And then I woke up. Mark was shaking me. "Jesus, Ethan, wake up. Wake the hell up." I gasped for air, coughing up lake water. My clothes were soaked. My skin was freezing. Mark pulled me to my feet. "We're leaving. Right now." I didn't argue. We ran. I didn't look back. Not even once. Because I knew if I did, I'd see myself standing there. Watching. Waiting. Smiling. We drove for hours, neither of us speaking. I felt empty. Like something was missing. Like something had been left behind. Or worse, like something had come back with me. Mark finally broke the silence. "We need to end this." His voice was quiet but firm. I swallowed hard. "Ow!" He hesitated. Then, "I think we have to go back. One last time." My stomach dropped. "Mark, we can't run from it forever, Ethan." I closed my eyes, because I knew he was right. But I also knew, next time, one of us wouldn't be coming back. Mark and I didn't speak for a long time after we left the lake. There was nothing to say, because we both knew this wasn't over. Not even close. We checked into another motel, even farther away from the lake, but sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The other me, standing just behind my reflection, watching, smiling, waiting. At some point, I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes, the room was different. Dark. Strange. The walls looked stretched, like the shadows had grown longer than they should be. The air felt thick, heavy like I was underwater. And then I saw the mirror. Not the one in the bathroom. The one standing at the foot of my bed. It shouldn't have been there. Mark and I had covered every reflective surface before we tried to sleep. But there it was. And inside it, I saw myself. Not a normal reflection. Not a mirror image. Just me. Standing there. Not blinking. Not breathing. Just watching. And then, slowly, it raised its hand. It touched the glass from the inside. And I felt it. A cold, wet pressure on my own hand, as if something was pressing against my skin from the other side of the glass. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room grew even thicker, the walls warping as if they weren't made of solid material anymore. And then it smiled. A slow, unnatural stretching of lips that weren't mine. And then it spoke. "You're almost ready." I tried to pull my hand away, but I couldn't move. My reflection pressed harder against the glass. The surface rippled, like water, and then it reached through. A wet, clammy hand gripped my wrist from the other side. I gasped, and suddenly I was being pulled in. I woke up gasping, covered in sweat. Mark was shaking me. "Ethan, wake up. Jesus Christ, wake up." I sat up, lungs burning like I'd been holding my breath for hours. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Mark looked terrified. "You were," he swallowed. "Jesus, man, you were whispering in your sleep." I wiped sweat from my forehead. What? What was I saying? Mark hesitated, and then, in a whisper, he repeated it. "Let me out." A chill ran down my spine, because I remembered saying it. But it wasn't me who had spoken. It was the other me, trapped behind the glass, trying to get through, trying to take my place. We didn't sleep after that. Mark sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the covered mirror across the room. "We have to go back," he said finally. I didn't respond, because I knew he was right. This wouldn't stop, not unless we ended it. The next morning, we prepared. We gathered everything we thought we might need: flashlights, ropes, even an old hunting knife Mark had in his truck. But deep down, I knew none of it would help. Because this wasn't something we could fight. This wasn't something we could kill. The drive back to the lake was silent. The sky was darker than before, heavy with storm clouds that never seemed to move. The trees lining the road looked different, wrong, like they weren't really there, like they were imitations of trees, reflections of something that didn't belong in this world. The farther we drove, the more the road seemed to stretch, like reality itself was warping. Mark gripped the wheel tighter. "Do you feel that?" he asked. I nodded. The lake was waiting for us, and it was hungry when we arrived. The water was just as we left it, still, black, empty. But now we knew better. It wasn't empty. It was full of them, the reflections that had been stolen, the people who had been taken, and the thing that wanted to take us too. Mark took a deep breath. "What's the plan?" I hesitated, because I didn't have a plan. But then a thought struck me. The reflections. They can't exist in the real world unless we let them, right? Mark frowned. "I guess." I swallowed. "What if we force them back?" Mark's eyes darkened. "How?" I looked at the water, at the mirror it created, and an idea formed. We make the lake show the truth. We stepped closer to the water's edge. Mark held the flashlight, and I took the hunting knife. The air was dead silent. I stared at my reflection. I saw myself, and then behind me I saw it, the other me, standing just beyond the first reflection, smiling, waiting. I didn't hesitate. I took the knife and slashed my own hand. Blood dripped into the water. The reflection shuddered. The smile faltered. Mark gasped. "Ethan, what the hell?" But I wasn't listening, because the water was moving. The reflection rippled, and then it screamed. A deep, inhuman wail that echoed through the trees. Mark stumbled back. Jesus Christ. The water boiled. Something was fighting back. Something didn't want to leave. But I pressed forward, because now I understood. This place, the lake, it was a doorway. A black mirror that connected our world to something else. And the only way to break it was to shatter the reflection. The reflection lunged forward. I grabbed its wrist. Its skin was cold, too smooth, like glass. It struggled, twisting, its face contorting into something inhuman. But I held on, because I knew this was the moment. This was the choice. Either it stayed, or I did. Mark grabbed me. "Ethan, let go." But I couldn't, because I saw it now. The truth. It wasn't just trying to replace me. It wanted to pull me through, into the hollow place beyond the glass. A place where no one ever came back. And then the water shattered, like real glass, cracking, breaking apart. The reflection screamed, and then it was gone. The lake returned to stillness. No more ripples, no more movement, just black, empty water, and my own reflection. Just me. Mark pulled me back, gasping for breath. "Is it over?" he whispered. I stared at the water, at my reflection, and for the first time in weeks, I saw nothing but myself. I let out a shaky breath. Yeah, but deep down I wasn't sure, because some things never really leave. They just wait. And I knew, one day, the lake would come calling again. The lake was still, black, silent, but I didn't believe it was over. Mark stood beside me, his breaths coming fast, his hands still shaking from what we had just done. We had forced it back. The other me. The thing that had been waiting beneath the surface, trying to take my place, trying to drag me down into that empty space behind the glass. But as I stood at the edge of the water, staring at my own reflection, the only reflection, I felt something deep in my gut. It wasn't finished. Not yet. We left the lake, but we didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The truck rumbled down the dirt road, headlights cutting through the endless trees, but the whole time I felt it. That weight in the air, that quiet, creeping presence, like something was still watching, still waiting. Mark drove in silence, hands clenched tight around the wheel, jaw locked. It wasn't until we were miles away that he finally spoke. What now? I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know. We had survived. We had fought back. But the lake didn't just go away. We got back to town in the early hours of the morning. Everything felt normal. People went about their lives. The sky was still blue. The world hadn't changed. But I had. I felt different, like something had shifted inside me. Like a part of me was still standing at the edge of that water, staring into the darkness, still listening for the thing that whispered from beneath the glass. I tried to move on. I really did. I went back home, back to work, back to my routine. But nothing felt real anymore. Mirrors became a problem. I avoided them when I could, covered them when I couldn't. Because every time I caught my own reflection, I saw it. That hesitation, that almost imperceptible lag, like the glass was still trying to hold something back, like it was still trying to decide which side of it I was really on. And then the dream started again. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, my body trembling from nightmares I couldn't quite remember. All I knew was the feeling, that awful, crushing weight, the sensation of falling, and the voice, a whisper that came from the dark corners of my mind. Almost ready. I didn't know what it meant, and I didn't want to find out. I kept in touch with Mark at first. We checked in on each other, made sure we were both still. Us. But as the days turned into weeks, the calls grew less frequent. I think we both wanted to pretend it hadn't happened, that it was just some terrible memory we could bury. But deep down we knew, you don't escape something like that. Not forever. It was exactly a month later when I got the call. Mark's number. At first I was relieved, but when I answered, there was nothing but breathing. Slow, shaky, and then a voice, a whisper. Not Mark's. Not mine. Let me out. The call ended. I stared at the phone, my hands ice cold, my stomach twisted into a knot. I called Mark back. No answer. I called again. And again. Nothing. I drove to his place the next morning. Knocked on the door. No response. I tried again, harder this time. And then I noticed something. The mirror in his hallway. I could see it through the half-open blinds. It was uncovered, and there was a smudge on the glass. A handprint, pressed against the inside. I broke the door down. The house was empty. No sign of Mark. His truck was still outside. His phone was on the kitchen counter. But he was gone. Just gone. And the only thing left was that mirror, standing at the end of the hallway, with a single wet handprint on the inside of the glass. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember driving home. But I remember the fear, the hollow, sinking realization. Mark hadn't just disappeared. He had been taken. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room, staring at the covered mirror on the far wall. My hands were shaking, because I knew what was going to happen. It had let me go before. But that was never the end. The lake, the thing inside it. It was patient. It was waiting. And now it had Mark. At some point, exhaustion took over. I drifted off, my head resting against the couch. And I dreamed of the lake, of the black water, of the endless, empty world behind the glass, and of Mark, standing at the edge of the water, his face pale, his eyes dark, and when he spoke, his voice was hollow. Empty. It's your turn. I woke up gasping. The air in my apartment felt thick. Wrong. And then I noticed it. The mirror. The sheet had fallen away. And in the dim light, I saw my reflection. Not just a reflection. Another me. Standing inside the glass. Smiling. And slowly it raised its hand. Pressed it against the glass. And I felt it. Cold. Wet. Real. And then the surface rippled. Like water. And I knew. It was time. The lake never really lets you go. You might think you've escaped. You might think you're safe. But one day, you'll look into a mirror, and something will look back, and it won't be you.